The flight had barely lifted from the runway when the tension began to simmer. Passengers adjusted their seats, attendants smiled their rehearsed smiles, yet every pair of eyes seemed drawn to one man in business class. A tall black man in Diyan Zatinbo, a tailored suit, calm, collected, scrolling through his tablet, until a flight attendant leaned closer, whispering something that made the entire cabin fall silent. Moments later, she returned with a forced smile and a request that cut sharper than the hum of the engines. He'd need to give up his seat. Confused stares, nervous laughter. The air grew heavier, the hum of the jet turning into a low, unspoken judgment. Some passengers looked away, others smirked. He rose slowly, a storm brewing behind steady eyes, unaware that before this plane would land, he'd be the one giving them permission to sit down. His name was Elijah Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Dynamics, a tech firm whose software quietly powered half the aviation industry. He wasn't wearing his status, no flashy accessories or loud presence, just a neatly pressed charcoal suit and the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding boardrooms, not airplane aisles. Yet here he stood, in a narrow corridor between rows of indifferent faces, his seat now occupied by a passenger who looked away as if guilt could vanish by, not making eye contact. The flight attendants avoided his gaze. The murmurs spread like wildfire. "It's just a seat. Why make a fuss?" As if courtesy had limits based on color. Elijah didn't argue. He simply nodded, took the seat offered at the back, and looked out the window, the reflection of the city lights fading beneath the clouds. He thought about how often this happened, not just in airports, but in meetings, partnerships, even polite conversations where credentials meant less than skin tone. But there was something different about today. The pilot announcement over the intercom interrupted his thoughts. The captain's voice sounded young, rehearsed, and tense. A storm warning was issued. Turbulence ahead. Elijah's hand rested on his watch. Not a fashion statement, but a prototype his company had developed. It synced directly with aircraft systems during testing phases, something few people outside his firm even knew existed. He had authorized that integration himself. When the plane began to shake, oxygen masks dropping, screams filling the cabin, Elijah's instinct took over. Years of training, simulations, and real-time analytics raced through his mind. From the back of the plane, he could see the flight attendants frozen, the cockpit door sealed shut. He unbuckled his belt. Calm, steady. The same demeanor that once convinced billion-dollar investors to trust his vision now cut through the chaos. The irony wasn't lost on him. Hours ago, they'd asked him to give up his seat. Now, fate was giving him something else entirely. Control. The storm struck harder than anyone expected. The cabin lights flickered, the engines howled, and the metallic body of the aircraft groaned under the pressure of shifting air currents. People screamed, prayed, clutched their armrests. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, strained, uncertain, before cutting out completely. Elijah steadied himself, gripping the seat in front of him. Years of leadership had taught him one rule. Panic spreads faster than fire, and once it starts, it consumes everything. From his vantage point, he saw the fear ripple through the rows, parents shielding children, businessmen shouting at attendants, phones flashing in trembling hands. He reached for his smartwatch again, tapping into the encrypted diagnostic feed, a backdoor only his company engineers knew existed. Within seconds, lines of flight data streamed onto the small screen. Altitude drop, engine 1 failing, autopilot disengaged. His pulse quickened. He recognized the failure code. It was one of his system's modules. Somewhere, deep in the aircraft's automated logic, the storm had overloaded the stabilizer algorithm. The same code he'd written years ago was now fighting for control and losing. He felt a hollow sting of responsibility cut through him. This wasn't just Random turbulence. This was his technology failing in real time. He stood, ignoring the murmured protests of passengers. "Sir, please sit down," one attendant called, her voice cracking. But he moved forward, stabilizing himself as the plane jerked violently. Again. Coffee cups and luggage spilled into the aisle, a child's stuffed bear rolling past his feet. Reaching the cockpit door, he saw the red light above it flashing, locked. The pilot wasn't responding. Elijah knew what that meant. Standard protocol during panic: lock the door to prevent interference. But there was no time for protocol anymore. He crouched, removed a slim metallic device from his jacket, an emergency override tool used during system demos. It wasn't meant for mid-air use, but the principles were the same. Within seconds, the lock released with a soft click. Inside, the scene was worse than he imagined. The co-pilot was unconscious, the captain barely holding the yoke steady as alarms screamed across every console. The altitude indicator blinked in red. Elijah didn't say a word. He slid into the co-pilot seat, fingers flying over the panels, assessing damage, rerouting systems, resetting controls. The captain's eyes darted toward him. Disbelief, then shock, then recognition. "Carter," he mouthed silently. Elijah gave a short nod. No need for introductions. He had once trained pilots like this man during simulation tests years ago. Outside the windshield, lightning clawed across the sky, illuminating walls of clouds like giant white beasts. The plane dove through a downdraft, and Elijah's body slammed against the harness. He gritted his teeth, adjusting the pitch manually while reinitializing his company's flight control system through the co-pilot console. Passengers screamed, again as oxygen masks flapped overhead. Every second stretched into eternity. His mind calculated probabilities, corrections, thrust balances. He wasn't just saving a plane. He was rewriting the final line of a story that had started with humiliation. Minutes passed in chaotic silence. Only alarms, thunder, and determination filled the cockpit. Slowly, the readings stabilized. The nose lifted. Altitude, 15,000 feet, then 18,000. The violent shaking eased into trembling. He felt the aircraft obey again, the metal giant listening to human hands, not machine panic. He exhaled, but didn't. Relax. The captain looked at him with a mix of awe and guilt, the same man who'd moments ago let him be moved from business class. Now, that man was watching Elijah fly his plane. Behind them, the cabin had quieted. The storm outside was still raging, but inside, something had shifted. The passengers didn't know his name yet. They didn't know that the man saving their lives was the same one they had silently judged, but they would soon. Elijah stabilized the craft and leaned back, drenched in sweat, feeling every heartbeat echo through his chest. For years, he'd fought for recognition in boardrooms and headlines. But tonight, 30,000 feet above a storm, he'd earned something rarer, respect that no one could take away. The storm had thinned to streaks of silver rain, but the plane was still far from safe. The left engine was running at half power. The navigation system had rebooted mid-sequence, and the captain's hands trembled from exhaustion. Elijah stayed locked in, guiding the aircraft through rough air that tossed them like a toy in a hurricane's palm. For a moment, he caught his reflection in the glass, eyes sharp, sweat carving thin rivers down his face. He had spent his life designing systems to prevent human error, and now he was proving that humanity still mattered more than the code. The control tower came faintly through the static. The captain fumbled the radio, voice breaking. Elijah leaned in, adjusted the frequency, and spoke with authority, calm, precise, professional. The air traffic controller on the other end fell silent for a second. He recognized the voice that had briefed their own tech teams years ago. "Mr. Carter, are you on board that flight?" Elijah's response was steady. "I am. We're regaining control. The captain turned to him, speechless. The same pilot who had once avoided meeting his eyes in the terminal now watched him like a man seeing leadership for the first time. Another warning light flashed, hydraulic pressure falling. Elijah made the call, an emergency descent and manual landing. It was a risk, but he knew every line of code in the stabilizer system. He'd built its heartbeat. He guided the plane downward, every motion deliberate, intuitive, the culmination of decades of work dismissed, undermined, questioned. Below, city lights glimmered through gaps in the clouds. The storm was clearing. The runway beacon flickered like a promise in the distance. At 10,000 feet, the cabin speakers crackled. Elijah reached for the intercom, his voice low but firm. He didn't announce his title, didn't mention what he'd done. He simply told the passengers to stay calm, that they were safe now. And somehow, everyone believed him. The same people who had looked through him hours ago now clung to his voice like it was oxygen. The wheels touched the tarmac with a deafening screech. The aircraft bounced once, then steadied, sliding through rainwater and finally slowing to a halt. Silence followed. Thick, stunned silence. Then, as the engines powered down, a wave of applause erupted through the cabin. Elijah stayed still for a moment, letting the sound wash over him, not as praise, but as closure. The pilot turned to him, eyes wet, whispering something that didn't need to be heard. Outside, blue emergency lights flashed through the mist. Inside, the man who had been asked to give up his seat had just landed the entire plane. The doors opened to a flood of flashing lights and rushing medics. The passengers stumbled out one by one, shaken, silent, then overcome with relief. Some wept. Others reached for Elijah's hand as they passed, mumbling thanks through trembling lips. Even those who hadn't spoken a word to him before the flight couldn't meet his eyes without guilt and gratitude colliding inside them. The pilot stood by the exit, motionless, as Elijah helped the injured co-pilot into the arms of waiting paramedics. When the captain finally approached, his shoulders sagged with shame. "I should have," he began, but the words never found their way out. Elijah only nodded once, calm, collected, and stepped aside. No need for apologies. The moment itself had already spoken louder than any excuse ever could. As emergency crews worked, one of the attendants, the same woman who'd asked him to give up his seat, stared from a few feet away, frozen. Her uniform was soaked, mascara smudged, but her eyes carried a look that would haunt her for years. The image of the man she'd underestimated saving her life with the same quiet dignity she had mistaken for submission. Hours later, when the investigation began, Elijah remained silent about his role. He gave his statement factually, humbly. The aviation officials knew who he was. His company's technology had prevented dozens of crashes in the past decade. This one would go down as another miracle attributed to his system. But the truth, the human truth, was deeper than data. By morning, the story had spread. News anchors called him the passenger who saved Flight 417. Social media filled with shaky videos of passengers recounting the moment they realized the man at the back of the plane was the mind behind the very tech keeping them alive. But Elijah stayed out of the spotlight. He wasn't interested in interviews or fame. He had already won something more meaningful. When he finally walked out of the terminal, dawn breaking over the tarmac, the same flight attendant approached. "Sir," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." He paused, then turned to her with a faint smile. Not proud, not bitter, just tired. "That's the thing," he said quietly. "We never really do, until we're forced to look." And with that, he disappeared into the morning light. The man they'd asked to move to the back of the plane, walking forward into a world still learning where true worth sits. As the camera fades, a question lingers. one that every viewer must wrestle with long after the story ends. How many times do we mistake silence for weakness before realizing it was strength all along?